Welcome to Do You Ever Wonder? The show that brings you answers to many of the questions that you may have, but with no one to ask. Do You Ever Wonder is hosted by Mike Haltman, CEO of Hallmark Abstract Service, who, like you, has always been deeply curious about a wide variety of topics. Each week, Mike will be speaking with guests who are leaders in their field and who have inspirational stories to tell. So now, sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, everyone, and indeed, my name is Mike Haltman, and welcome to Do You Ever Wonder? The purpose of this podcast is really to bring on guests who are experts in their field, who can enlighten us all on different things that we really know little about, don't know a lot about, but that probably we should know more about. And today, we're very fortunate to have with us Kathy Boyle, who is the president of Chapin Hill Advisors, which
Chapin Hill. Yep.
Chapin Hill. She's also the founder of the Circle of Influence networking group, business development group, and she's involved in many other endeavors too. So I think it's going to be very interesting. And also about halfway through, there's a little bit of a curveball, but nothing to worry about. Welcome, Kathy.
Uh-oh, now you made me anxious. Hey, Mike, nice to be here.
Terrific. So to start off with Chapin Hill Advisors, what you guys are trusted advisors to your clients. You have something that you call life planning. What exactly is life planning?
So planning in layman's terms is where we really get down and dirty, touchy-feely with you. So how do you feel about your kids? How do you feel about your grandkids? How do you feel about your stepchildren? Do you want to retire and own a home where they all come to roost? Do you want to be the party central? Are you really close to your kids? Or you're like, okay, I raised them. I did good. I want to be alone. I'm going to Florida. If they want to come visit, great, but they can get an Airbnb near us. Right. So it's personal preference, okay? And most people, when they think about retirement, they don't think about it. They don't actually think it through. Maybe they're on their day job. Maybe they're on their own business. Maybe they're just like, so busy every day. They don't think forward. And most people, I'd say 99% of the people you talk to really don't want to play golf every single day of the week. So what does life look like? And so we go through that process of the familial sort of relationships and the touchy-feely again in between spouses, extended family, and then we put numbers to it.
It's very interesting because my wife's mom just passed away a couple of weeks ago.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, thank you. But, when you look at all of the things that occur after someone passes away, when planning was not as in-depth as perhaps it could have been. And, my wife was there the entire time and did as much as she could. But at the end of the day, if people leave a lot of loose ends, it can create a mess. And when
it's a freaking nightmare for people after they're gone. Well, and so much is so easy to be done, but people don't want to face it.
100%. And just to inject the fact that when you bring in the currents between siblings and the currents between other people who it can be very nice, I assume, but not in this case.
Not always. Most of the time not. In fact, I'm hired right now by an estate, by the executrix of a fairly large, substantial estate, and there's 4 siblings, and she really hired me partially to help her sort out the steps. There's just so much. And even though her father was very successful and a complete control freak, there were things that he really dropped the ball. He chose the wrong advisors. And she even made a mistake in terms of choosing the attorney. The attorney was not admitted to the bar in Florida, and the father's estate was actually domiciled in Florida. So you need a Florida attorney leading the charge, right? And then different siblings would like money now, and she's cautious because there may be a big estate tax, and if the houses don't sell, not liquid. So these are the kinds of things that much of this would have been. I even said to her in our last meeting, I said, if somebody like me had been involved a year ago, you wouldn't be facing half of the major issues that you're facing.
Well, unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't really want to face their ultimate demise and don't really take care of all of the things that should be taken care of. Whether it's even something as simple as picking someone to take care of your kids if, God forbid, you and your wife pass away. I mean, it's something as basic as that, and people really don't want to face these things. But so in your case, you're brought in after the fact. So you're hired as a consultant by the executrix.
Well, in this case, that's not
Right.
the ideal. I mean, the ideal is for me to come in well ahead of time. When I come in, we really focus on family-owned businesses and this exit planning, succession planning, whether it's transfer to the next generation or the third generation, or an outright sale, or selling the operating business, keeping the building and having the real estate as an entity ongoing with income, or sell the real estate and keep the operating business, if you need liquidity. So those are the decisions that I help people funnel through, but I need to come in early enough to be able to fix a lot of this, because a lot of this stuff is not easy. It is technically easy, but everybody's busy and you have to get attorneys involved. Sometimes you have to wait for the court. Sometimes you have to wait for evaluation. Sometimes you have to wait for, a transfer at the county. And again, during COVID, things got really slowed down, right? And everything was remote. Now, at least you can go in an office most of the time and push along. But again, if you're dealing with bureaucracy, it's very difficult. But no, so most of what I do is actually do before, doing the planning in advance. And it varies. We work almost entirely with high net worth families and businesses between 5 million and 50 million. We can go down as low as 2 and go as high as a couple hundred million, but the sweet spot is mostly 5 to 50 million. We're industry agnostic. I'm a vegan. I'm really passionate about animals, so I will not work with any industries that harm animals. So I won't work with furriers, leather, animal husbandry, et cetera. But otherwise, we're pretty agnostic. And it's really a business is a business is a business.
So do you find that in a sole owner patriarchal kind of business versus a partnership of two relatives or just a partnership of two non-relatives, do you find that in one of those circumstances they typically do less? I mean, I would think that a partnership between non-relatives might do more, but not necessarily. So what do you see?
So a lot of what we see are siblings, right? So we have two brothers that form the business, and especially if they're first generation from another country, other countries often grow up very, multi-generation centric, right? So they take care of their 90-year-old mother and they share expenses between the siblings. But what we point out to them is here in the United States, first of all, there's an estate tax. So if one sibling dies, there can be a liquidity event that's needed and can affect the operating business depending on how they were structured. The second thing is that your spouse becomes the spouse of your brother, if your brother dies, becomes your partner. And you
Yeah.
may love your sister-in-law for Thanksgiving dinner and her wonderful meals and, going out to, family dinners, but do you want to be her business partner or do you want her to be your business partner? No. We also see this with the second generations. Two brothers started the business and now their kids are cousins. And now we have 3 cousins on one side and 2 cousins on the other. And maybe the father of the one with the 2 has a majority interest, or maybe he's the de facto controlling portion because his brother died and his widow is alive, but she's not an ongoing, really active participant in the business. So the de facto control has passed over to uncle. But the one with 3 kids, maybe they're more active in the business. So these are all the issues that we get into. And then when you have the first generation, very often they just really don't think about the laws as they apply in America, right? I had one Greek guy just tell me, don't worry about Greece. Don't worry about Greece. He has 3 homes in Greece. And I'm like, darling, when you fly to Greece and there's no corresponding hotel, or you insure those properties, the IRS is not stupid. If they do an audit of your estate, they're going to see all the plane trips, no corresponding hotel, and they're going to realize you have property. The estate tax exemption is quite large. And so it's up to, I think off the top of my head, around 25 million per couple.
Right.
And so if you have that much, unless you're very, very, very wealthy, which is a tiny percentage of the overall country, that 25 million covers an awful lot of people. And if you have a privately held business, the IRS allows you to discount the valuation. So you can get a true valuation. We're not playing games, but it has to be in advance of a sale. Well, in advance of a sale, if I have an offer on the table, I can't turn around and say, hey, Johnny, we're going to discount the business. So it's got to be a number of years before we actually get to the actual sale. And then you can discount the valuation. You can move those shares around. You can put 50%. You can give us unlimited amount right now between spouses. So you can go back and forth with spouses, transfer ownership, change the house from joint title to a single title, put it into a trust. You can move assets from the business to a trust for the children. And another thing, siblings, parents sometimes just want to do the ostrich, right? Put the head in the sand and just hope the whole thing works out.
Yep.
They're dead. What do they care? Right. And, the reality is they do love their children and they don't want to fight, but the anxiety of having that conversation now. So that's where sometimes we bring in the family business counselors who have the ability to negotiate conversations, or we may do a retreat. We may partner with someone. I don't personally do retreats, but I'll participate in them with someone else leading them. So I'll do the financial piece.
No, I know that the conversations surrounding money can be uncomfortable depending on the situation, and if there are multiple people involved, it can be extremely uncomfortable, particularly if you have a ne'er-do-well son and a son who's active in the business. I mean, there's all the various tentacles of these things are wild, and the path of least resistance is to stick your head in the ground. And I guess if you're dead, then you don't know the troubles you've caused. But it can definitely be a nightmare.
Oh, one extreme example, a trust and estate attorney I know actually made his major client for over 20 years was one of the largest businesses in the world in its entity. There was a Hong Kong partner. The father died in the United States and split the shares evenly between, I believe, his wife and his 3 daughters. One daughter was angry. She thought that she should have been the heir apparent. She sued her sisters for almost 20 years. She actually went to law school and got a degree so that she could sue them on her own.
And unfortunately, the prospect of a sibling suing other siblings is not totally foreign to me, and it's a shame. And what tears apart every family, probably 99% of the time, is money. And it's what they say, blood is thicker than water, but I think money is thicker than blood. So your recommendation would be that for anyone with any means to really sit down and hammer things out. I mean, I've seen companies of decent size where partnerships with no operating agreements and where there's no succession plans. I mean, it's a recipe for large disaster, I would say.
Absolutely. I had one family in the city that had 2 entities, each doing about 30 million in revenue. And the one entity was sort of accidental. And then I sketched out the estate tax and I asked the father, he ended up giving shares of the one company to their manager. And I said, you just gave shares? There's supposed to be gift tax filing, right? So again, a lot of this doesn't get found out unless you get audited. There's not any way for the IRS to figure this out. But then I asked them, I said, what if this man died? And I said, oh, that would be very bad.
Now, you know what? It's funny. The business practices of very honest people who may do things during the course of their business that may cut a corner or two, may save taxes or whatever. When the crap hits the fan and people come in and look at what they did that was not blatantly
Fraudulent.
fraudulent, but it's a shame. It's really a shame. So I think that the result is that people need to find somebody like you who can do that.
Right. And that's why we call it life planning, Mike, because this isn't something that's easy, right? A lot of it, again, is technically easy. Can you get a will done? Yes. Can the attorney draft that up for you and just shoot it over to you, review it, execute it? Sure. 63% of Americans do not have wills. And the number one reason is because they can't decide who should be the guardians.
Oh,
And
yeah.
one of the questions we ask is the guardian may be a different person than the person managing the money. but they need to know each other and they need to get along.
Right.
And, I remember one couple was sitting in my office once, and second marriage, and his children from the first marriage were older, got along well. And I said, who would be the guardian? Will it be his son? And then I said, who's going to manage the money? And in this case, the wife is younger and actually made more money. She had her own business. And she said, oh, my sister. I said, oh, your sister's going to manage the money, but your stepson's going to be the guardian of the children. How's that going to fly? And it may fly fine, but let's talk about it.
Right. You can't just, right. Like my brother, who's 2 years older than me, he's not a man of means, but he has a 10-year-old son, and he wants me to meet. I have some role in his estate, and he wants me to meet the person who's going to be managing the money in his estate because he thinks it's important that we meet. And I think that's right.
Right. It is. And, I recently had well, it's actually been a couple of years now, and I knew he had one nephew, and that's all he had. This man was in his 90s, and I had him as a client for many, many years. But I never met the nephew. The nephew, is not someone of means, super nice, very nice guy, not educated. Well, he has a felony. New York does not allow somebody, actually, they just changed the law. So he just called me yesterday, but 2 years ago, we were stuck because he was the executor and he was the actual heir to all of the money, but he couldn't actually be appointed. So we have an estate that's been in limbo for over 2 years because the courts were closed. He's in New Jersey, and it's a New York estate. And so it was just a nightmare. And even with me in the picture, I helped him get an attorney. She drafted the will, but, would we ever thought to have looked at the background of the nephew?
You know what? I'm finding more and more that looking at people's backgrounds is very important. We have a client of my title company who their client was buying a property, and it turned out that the seller's attorney was disbarred. And should an attorney check the standing of the opposing attorney? I never thought so, but I think you have to check everything these days.
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, during the pandemic, I ended up pivoting into PPE. So gloves, masks, gowns. There's so much fraud in that business that I Google everybody. And then with animal rescue, which I also do, we rescue dogs out of Texas. So I'm taking dogs from all kinds of backwoods places, rural areas. And I have all kinds of people that say, I'll foster for you. So we actually run a background check because we found more than once the name they use on Facebook is not accurate and that there is some kind of criminal background. And I'm not putting one of my dogs with somebody with a criminal track record.
No, I agree with that. So how do you find your clients, or do they find you?
So good question. That's always the challenge for anybody generating business, right? And especially if you're busy doing the work that you do, how do you find the time to market? So my primary means are things like this: podcasts where people get to know me, hear me, listen, talk. So I do a number of podcasts. I also do a lot of TV and radio. I write a blog called Effective Strategies for Success that goes out to our target market. But the primary way I get business is public speaking. So I have another business called Kathy Boyle on the Go. And through that, I give speeches directly to my target market. So we will look at, Concrete World Show in Vegas. We'll look at the amusement park trade show in Orlando in October. Those have the family entertainment businesses, everybody from Dollywood all the way down to the pinball guy with one arcade. And so I get up and I speak, and I have funny topics like how 4 business owners left $1 billion on the table. And so they're fun topics. I like humor. I'm very down to earth. The person I'm working with is often a blue collar millionaire. They're not, Proskauer or white, shoe law firms clients in New York City. They may be, but for the most part, they're living in areas where they have their trusted advisor who may be an attorney that they've had forever. And one of the things I've often discovered, especially within ethnic groups, we tried to specialize in Turkish businesses for a while because the Turks that are here have a fair amount of money. They're the ones that have been able to leave Greece. They often have real estate still in Turkey. And with the lira being crushed, that can affect their cash flow terms, transfer of currency. But most of their kids went to Harvard and Yale, and they're very proud of that. And the kids don't actually want to be in the oil and gas business or the shipping business. And so you really have, but a lot of times the ethnic groups like that, they come in, they get their local attorney through one of their friends. They speak Turkish as a primary language, so it's easy for them. And that's great when you're starting up a business. But often, if that's a solo practitioner attorney who's a general practitioner, as your business grows, you really need specialists. So you really need a trust and estate attorney who does trust and estate work every day, all day, not the real estate attorney doing a will, because they took that class in school, but that's not what they do day in and day out. And if you own properties in multiple states, you've got to make sure that you're in compliance with the state statutes as well as the federal. So, so that's one of the things we look at doing is being able to give them the right advisor, which is part of where the circle of influence comes in, because anybody that's in the circle of influence is a trusted professional. So we can refer them out with confidence, knowing that they'll take care of us. Because again, everybody looks great on paper. And within certain communities like attorneys and accountants, a lot of accountants are very point to point in communication. So we call them historians. They look at what you already did. They don't plan forward. Most CPAs, not to denigrate the profession at all, but that's just how they're trained. And also many attorneys over lawyer, or they give you a big treaty, big will and trust. You have no clue what it actually means. And it's 25 pages of legal. Wow. And, so we prefer the attorneys who will actually give a summary on top. And very often I'm very collaborative with the attorneys, the ones that I really like and trust. I work with very closely. So we'll actually plan it out and we'll go back and forth because I know enough to be able to, I know the client intimately. So I know what they want in terms of their wishes. So thinking about how we structure trust, whether or not all the children should be in one, whether there should be separate ones, all those sorts of nuances, easier for me to help guide and do it shorthand, right?
Oh, you know what? A very thorough process. Let me just, to break away from that topic for a second, where are you? That's not a green screen behind you, right?
It's not. I'm actually in Fairfield, Connecticut.
Very nice. It looks, so the air quality there is not like the air quality on Long Island, I guess.
No, yesterday it was pretty bad. Yesterday we did, have all the doors shut. I was out for a bit and picked my guinea pig out for a little fresh air, and that was not the right thing. So we all went back inside the house and closed the doors. But yeah, it seems to have cleared up here.
My middle daughter sent us a picture from Manhattan, which I'm sure you've seen those pictures. It looked like an apocalyptic Mars surface. But yeah, no, it's crazy. So now we're on to the little bit of a curve that I have. So I'm sure you've seen in the stock market that anything that has AI next to it has been on fire. And AI is the buzzword of the day. So I wanted to try and bring AI into our little talk. So I went on ChatGPT and I said, what are questions that you would ask a financial planner? And I want to know whether you think these questions are good or bad.
How funny.
Whether they're just basic or whether they're relevant. The first one is, can you provide an overview of your experience and qualifications as a financial planner?
Oh, so that's a decent question. I mean, that's why people use LinkedIn. That's why we have websites, right? So you can see my accreditations, you can see where I went to school, et cetera. So you can see how long I've been in business. So yeah, that's a valid point.
Okay. I mean, to be honest, knowing ChatGPT, most of the questions probably are good questions. But how do you determine an individual's risk tolerance? Is that based on a test? Is that based on talk?
So that's an interesting question because we look at risk in a multiple of venues. I think they're really referring to your risk in the stock market, right? And somebody's risk in the stock market is very difficult to generate, to actually figure out in advance because greed and fear. right? And so when the market's going up like it has been now, I mean, 700 points last week, in one day, everybody's like, yeah, the economy's going to be okay. Rates are not going to go up anymore. Yeah, the market's going to continue. So people get very enamored with the market. And then when it turns around and goes down, the blame starts coming out and the fingers start pointing, right? And very often the non-working spouse does not allocate any of his or her time, often her, to the market. So it falls in the purview of the husband who works with the advisor, and they make all the decisions sort of in a vacuum. And sometimes we've tried to get the women involved kicking and screaming, right? We really prefer that they're in the quarterly meetings. So at least, but to them, a lot of what we talk about sounds like blah, blah, blah. And they actually say that to me. So getting that risk tolerance, but in the bigger picture, we look at risk tolerance as, what's the risk of your business cratering before you can sell it? What's the risk of you dying before the business is transferable? What's the risk of you dying before you get your wills and trusts set up? What's the risk of your insurance running out before you need it? So those are different types of risks. So when you look at risk, it's a big picture, and there's not one test. I've tried all different kinds of quantitative analysis in terms of risk tolerance, and all of them are worth the paper they're printed on.
Well, it's funny. One of my kids, who she's 30, and she does very well, took a risk tolerance test with someone, and they said, I just had a 72-year-old man in here who's got more of a risk tolerance than you do. So yeah, it's hard, but no, that's great. And I know that I've seen over the years so many situations where the non-moneyed spouse has no idea of what's going on, and when the other spouse passes first, it's a nightmare.
It is. And they
Particularly
sit there.
if there's been financial infidelity, then particularly it's a nightmare.
Yes. If there's divorce, the women are, up the creek, and very often when we do divorce planning, we're working with the women out of New Canaan and Greenwich who are married to the hedge fund gods who only know how to turn on their Range Rover remote, right? And they know where to buy the kids' clothes and the school tuition, et cetera, but they don't know where the money comes from. And so they're at risk because the moneyed spouse can actually change ownership. I've seen IRAs change custodian all the way down to an island in the Caribbean.
Wow.
Try to value an IRA that's now custodied in the Cayman Islands.
It's amazing also that, well, you're talking about a divorce situation where you would assume that the moneyed spouse, whether it's the husband or the wife, would want the other spouse to be in a position to take care of the kids. But I guess that's not always how that works, I suppose.
No, I had one guy bury $50,000 a tree in the house in New Canaan rather than give it to her,
Yeah.
and was going to threaten if she didn't settle, he was taking her to court, and that meant more legal fees. So divorce is just a nasty business. I personally hate doing divorce planning. But I do become the secret weapon because I understand what private equity is. I understand what hedge fund options, et cetera, et cetera. And the women have no clue where to start. They don't have a balance sheet. I remember when I was much younger and I got the original certified divorce planner designation. And one of the first people I talked to was in Scarsdale. She had a tenured job in California that had given up to move to the East Coast in Southern Westchester. And they were in debt up to their eyeballs. They had loans on the 401k. The house was more than they could afford. She was bouncing checks all over town. And I said, didn't it occur to you to ask whether he'd gotten a raise when you move from one house to the next? And, this is not a dummy. She went to Columbia, and she just said, he told me we could afford it. So I believed him.
Well, there's the first mistake. You got to trust but verify. So how does the conversation one of the questions is, can you explain your fee structure and how you're compensated for your services? Now, I'm sure maybe with the people you work with, that's not an uncomfortable question.
Nobody loves to pay fees, right? That's always an issue, right? I have a trucking company that I thought was a go. And I think I made a mistake in giving him the type of billing I gave to the estate, which she was great, but she's not actually paying for it, right? The estate is paying for it, and she's an attorney by background, so she understands the rationale behind the fee. But with him, I think I would have been better off charging him a small amount of money, giving him an analysis, and then going from there. So they always think a lot of business owners think that they can sell the business themselves, or that they don't need tremendous amount of planning help. And those are some of the top mistakes that business owners make, is trying to sell it themselves. So where the conversation around fee gets very complicated is, I'm a consultant. So in Chapin Hill, we charge straight planning fees. It's a consulting firm. And we have we have a rate schedule for each of us in the firm. And then we like to do package deals where it's one flat fee, but we can bill hourly. We can do a retainer model. So we usually explain that. But where it gets gray is if there's insurance. There's a lot of financial planners, quote unquote, that are really masquerading planners, but they're insurance brokers. And so they have to come up with a sale. I don't have to come up with a sale. I'm getting paid a fee. However, I am insurance licensed. So if there is an insurance sale, I do get a finder's fee, essentially, which is disclosed in our contract.
Right. No, that's great. That was an AI question, not my question.
Mm-hmm.
But we only have a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to get a little bit into the circle of influence. Now, I appreciate your bringing me in. It's a great group. I've met a few in person at a Manhattan event about a month ago, and it's a great group of people. And I understand that the purpose of the group is really business development. But I'm in another group. I run another group, and I always preach about know, like, trust, and how until you trust, you really can't give your most valuable asset, which is your client, which is your prospect. You can't do business with someone until you really trust that they're going to do business the same way that you do. So is that kind of the thinking that went into creating the circle of influence, and how do you decide who you're going to bring in?
So good questions. I mean, one of the things that I personally can't stand is, I won't name them, but certain types of networking groups have sort of the command referral, right? And the group is very focused on, let's stand up, who gave leads this week, right? And if I'm in a group like that, first of all, the landscaper might be very nice and I may use him personally, but there's no way the landscaper is talking about finance and succession planning to my target clients. So they're not a good match for me. So that's one thing, in the sort of a lot of the networking groups, I don't go to them any longer because it's just a waste of my time. An hour is agony for me if I'm meeting, 3/4 of the people that I don't want to meet. I don't really need any more people in my network. I have a huge network and I just naturally attract more people with everything I do. So the idea behind the circle of influence is, when I go into a family to help them plan, very often I need new attorneys. Sometimes I need pension accountants, all what we call the hard side, right? Valuation, M&A, and a lot of them I have them, but very often I'm now dealing in a new state. So all of a sudden I'm in Ohio. I don't really have a big network in Ohio. I have friends in Ohio I can call, but maybe they don't always have the right caliber of person I need. So that was part of it, is if I go in and I introduce a business coach to my client and they screw up, they either drop the ball, charge too much, don't give good advice, whatever. There's 8 million ways for people to screw up. It affects my relationship, my reputation. So the idea behind the circle of influence is, these are trusted, tested in the trenches. So everybody in there, someone else has either used or someone else knows them well enough to say, yes, Mike will absolutely do what he says he does. And he's competitive with X, Y, and Z. So you can be assured they're going to get the same level of service, but maybe not the same fee. And, again, so we attract people really by people. I built it originally out of people that I knew that were already in my breakfast club. And we had events in the city before the pandemic. And so people that attended my event on a regular basis and I got to know really well. And, you know, you can separate the wheat from the chaff after talking to somebody a couple times. If somebody doesn't follow through on an email introduction that I made, forget it. You know, if somebody is a taker, forget it. You know, they're out. So we want givers.
What if somebody's rude?
Yes, that we just had that happen. So they're kicked out of my group permanently, you know, so we'll put them on the block key. I'm really quick on block. And so, yeah, so the whole idea behind the circle of influence is to know that anybody in the group, and it's really not a networking group per se. There's a networking component to it, certainly. And we host events so that people can get to know one another. But I got tired of everybody always calling me and emailing going, Kathy, I need an attorney who can handle this. Kathy, do you have somebody in Florida who can do this? Kathy, can you help me set up a dynasty trust? You know, and these are all one-off questions asking me for introductions to people because I know so many people, but I wanted to have a way to say, here, be in the group, make your own connections. Everybody, remember, most people, the average person knows 100 people. People like us that are out there doing podcasts, you know, on TV, networking, we know thousands of people.
Right.
So how do I find the one or two people in your network who might be good for me? And so that's the idea. And as the need comes up, you know, if you're doing a title and the real estate attorney happens to mention to you, oh, geez, you know, this person actually has a father who's failing. So that's part of why they're doing this house so that they can blah, 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 right? That can open up the door to say, gee, do you have all the estate work done? You know, I know an attorney I can refer you to, blah, blah, blah. So as we roll this out nationally, we're about to roll it out probably in the next 2 months. And then there'll be a very robust questionnaire. So up until this point, it's from people that are personally connected to me, personally connected to somebody else in the group. But we're going to have a very robust questionnaire with background checks, social media checks, 3 references that we will actually speak to, a video interview with my virtual assistant. And then if they get through all of that, they'll have an interview with me.
Wow.
And so if they get through all of that, then they'll be approved to join, but then they can only join once a quarter for 5 days. So they have to be pre-approved 2 weeks before that period's open. And then the manual part we'll probably have to do is limit the number of people per category.
Right. Wow, that's a robust examination. Hopefully, I'm grandfathered in, but if not, you can do background check on me. I have nothing to hide. But listen, this was great. We have to unfortunately go, but I hope to have you back on again.
Sounds great. Thanks, Mike. Have a great day.
Absolutely. You too.
Thank you for listening to Do You Ever Wonder? And we hope that you enjoyed the show. Next week, we will have another terrific guest telling their story. And if there are any specific topics you'd like to hear more about, please don't hesitate to let us know. Our curiosity, like yours, knows no bounds. Please subscribe and like and share this episode on your social media. See you next week.